Hi guys! Okay, so for those of you who are not already aware of this, there was a huge blowout on social media recently after the Land Rover 3-day event, aka Rolex. I'm gonna call it Rolex even though it's called the Land Rover event now because that's what I'm used to. But anyways, there was huge controversy over what happened at Rolex with a specific rider, and that is an American show jumper named Marilyn Little, and she also does these 4-star events with some of her horses. So she was at Rolex for this, and she has a track record with similar instances of these types of things happening, and I'm gonna go into detail on all of those and why people were so upset. If you haven't already seen it, basically the first thing that people freaked out about at Rolex was that her flash in dressage was super tight. There is a 2-finger flash rule to ensure that flashes are properly fitted, and I have no idea how she would have made it into her test based on that, because it does not look like there's any way that it was remotely possible to fit the 2 fingers under there, and it was just simply too tight. To add on to that, she ended up winning dressage. She's at the top of the leaderboard after dressage, which is completely and utterly ridiculous considering how tight her flash was. It should never have happened, and we shouldn't be allowing people to go into the arena with their nosebands fitted that way. It's important to acknowledge the fact that while she chose to put her flash that tight, and it's her fault for doing that, and she dropped the ball as a professional and chose to do something unethical, it's also a problem with the organizations that govern these types of events, because she shouldn't have been allowed into the arena in the first place, and the fact that someone like her was able to get away with it means that other people could try the same thing, and since she got away with it, there's less of an incentive not to do stuff like that. So it's a really big problem that stuff like this is even allowed to happen, and I think that should be most people's biggest concern, because Marilyn Little is just one person, so even if you have a problem with her, you also need to look at how she's being enabled to do what she does. I'll put the photo of her flash right there. It was obscenely tight. A lot of people looked at the photo of the flash, and there's one specific photo that got the most airtime on social media, and the horse was just opening her lips in it, and a lot of people tried to use that as an argument as to why the flash wasn't too tight, because the horse was opening her lips. However, flashes are not supposed to strap the jaw completely shut. They're not supposed to keep the teeth clamped together the whole time. Horses should still be allowed to have a dynamic mouth, not allowed to gape necessarily, but they should be able to open and close their mouths, and especially open their lips without it being pressing into their skin super tight. So it was absolutely improperly fitted. There's really no way around that. I don't know how a flash could ever appear to be that tight if you actually followed the 2-finger rule. And the reason why we have a rule like that is so that horses are able to move their mouth around. Even with bitless bridles and stuff, there's really no animal on this earth that keeps their teeth slammed together constantly all day during work and everything. Like, even people, we don't do that all the time. We have an active mouth that's moving around and adjusting, and if that ability was taken away from you, it would be really uncomfortable, especially if you were made to work with a bit in your mouth. Now, this isn't to say that bits are bad, but people like Marilyn are counterproductive to promoting the ethicality of bits, because the bits she uses in general are pretty scary looking, and when she pairs them with improperly fitted nosebands and flashes that are that tight, it just sets a really poor example and makes everyone else look bad. All the other eventers that she was competing alongside are gonna get a bad name. People are gonna slam eventing as a sport instead of slamming the people like her that make it look bad. She's competing alongside people like Michael Young and Boyd Martin, and those are just incredible horsemen, and they wouldn't do something like that. They have really nice track records, and they're just really beautiful riders, and I've never really seen an instance where their tack was inappropriately fitted personally. Those are just 2 names that came to the top of my mind. Anyway, so I don't think we should slam the entire sport over the actions of a single person, because while there are people out there like that in all sports, that doesn't make all people bad, and targeting everyone and putting them all under the same microscope as Marilyn and acting like they're all the same, that doesn't really help anyone, because then you're slamming the people who are ethical, who do follow the rules, and who are promoting the good in the sport. It's important to be aware of what the problem is and target the individual problems and not do blanket assumptions across the whole discipline and vilify everyone within it. So I think that's something to keep in mind when I go into this video, because it's going to be pretty upsetting for people to see some of these photos. They're pretty gross. It's important to point out that this type of thing is not happening in such excess with other riders. Okay, so with the flash, her flash was way too tight, and then she placed at the top of the leaderboard after dressage, which is just completely unacceptable, because they're reaffirming this is okay for you to use your equipment like this by giving her that placing. So she's being enabled and encouraged even to continue doing things the way she does, because she's being awarded for it. And that's the biggest problem. Our governing bodies should not be awarding that type of horsemanship. They should be actively speaking out against it. So my encouraging comment to you guys in dealing with this is, instead of taking to YouTube and stuff and commenting all over videos of other riders just for riding in bits or for having bad ec or for so on and so forth, target your organizations that are governing these types of shows and have the say in what is ethical on showgrounds. Because if she's getting away with this in public, we can only imagine how much more relaxed she would be at home with what she does. The fact that she's willing to do that in such a public place and with so many other incredible riders at such a prestigious event, that really says a lot about how far she may be willing to go. I'm not saying to make assumptions or blame her for things that you can't prove, but it does make me wonder how willing she would be to go further than that at home if she's willing to do that in such a public place. Okay, so flash aside, the flash was actually one of the least bad parts of this whole debacle. She has a track record of having bloody mouths on her horses. I think it's been 6 or 7 times now at events. So who knows how often this happens in training at home. So there was a bloody mouth this year at Not Rolex on her horse RF Scandalous, and to my knowledge this horse has had bloody mouths in the past, but it's also important to note that she's also had bloody mouths on other horses. So you can't pinpoint it to a single horse and be like, oh, maybe this horse just has a tendency to bite her tongue, because it's been numerous different horses and also several times over the course of many different events over several years. So something isn't changing. She isn't changing how she's riding or how she's tacking up her horses to be more careful. And the fact that she did put her flash on like that in dressage, that concerns me, because if your horse has a tendency to bite its tongue or its lips, so she claimed, why would you rig the flash in such a way that they can't use their mouth properly and avoid doing that? So that kind of bothers me, because if you have a track record of these types of things happening, you'd think that there'd be some concern and change in how you ride and handle them to try and prevent that from happening, but it doesn't really seem to have been happening that way. And she hasn't really gotten in trouble for it yet, despite the fact that we do have bloody mouth rules to try to prevent this type of treatment. To put things in perspective, the last big scandal we had in eventing was with Eliza Wallace, I'm not sure how to say her name properly, when she went to badminton horse trials with her horse, I forget his name, it's Johnny something, I think. Anyways, this was last year. She took him there for her first 4-star with him, I think it was, and he ended up hitting a jump and falling near the end of the course because he wasn't in shape and he was really fatigued. After which she had this huge apology saying that she'd let herself down, let the sport down, and that she felt absolutely horrible and she would never do it again. Immediate public apology, taking blame for the whole thing. And then this year at Not Rolex, she comes in and her horse is fit and he looks great, and she shows that she's learned and changed from that. So this isn't to say that people can't make mistakes with how they handle their horses, but you do have to consider, are they actually trying to change, and is there really any effort being shown to prevent these things from happening? So I would still say that Eliza, or Eliza, I don't know how to say her name, is such a good role model for that, because she owned her mistake and proved that she had learned from it. So I'm not saying to witch hunt people and never forgive them for their mistakes, but it's really important to look at how they handle said mistakes. Okay, so anyways, we had the bloody mouth this year with RF Scandalous and Marilyn Little at Not Rolex, okay? Important things to keep in mind regarding bloody mouths. I wouldn't say that every single bloody mouth ever is the rider's fault. Horses can bite their tongues and lips even in a bitless bridle. It's not necessarily a bitting thing. It's not necessarily a rider's hand things. However, happening in excess of 6 to 7 times, that is unusual. Most people do not have problems like that. And if the horse is biting their tongue by accident, usually it doesn't happen that often because it would be after like they tripped and fell, or they threw their head and spooked and accidentally bit down on their tongue, stuff like that. It shouldn't be happening this often in the public eye. It's very unusual, and that's something to keep in mind. So this isn't to say that every bloody mouth is the fault of the rider, but if it's happening 6 to 7 times with the same person in a public place, that is very unusual and it is cause for concern. And the other thing to keep in mind that makes me less willing to believe the fact that it's not a rider error are the bits that Marilyn Little tends to use. Her cross-country bit that she uses with RF Scandalous, I think it is, it's better called a contraption. She uses a double twisted wire gag with one rein, so every time she takes up any contact, the gag goes into action. If she had used 2 reins, it would be slightly less harsh because she could choose when to use the snaffle and when to use the gag, but it doesn't do that. So that's a huge problem, and personally I think it should be illegal to pair an abrasive mouthpiece with the gag in the first place. Those two things don't need to go together, and at 4-star level the riders should be talented enough to have their horses work properly without needing such a harsh bit. I'm definitely not at all okay with that. I personally do not like twisted wire bits in general, but if you pair them with a gag, it's basically a torture device in my opinion. It's just really, really harsh, and I cannot really think of a good reason to put a horse in one. Okay, and that's not all though. It's not just the twisted wire gag with one rein. She also uses this weird noseband thing that has a chain going under the nose, like under the chin here, where the mandibular nerve would be on the horse. So that's a very sensitive nerve, and putting a chain right underneath there, it can be painful. The chain looks slightly different from a curb chain in that it doesn't look like it lays quite as flat. I have to look at the photo again. That might not be true, but I personally don't think it looked like it was laying as flat, which means it would have more pressure points. And on top of that, the noseband she uses also has like a flash piece that goes in front of the bit and keeps the mouth shut. So it's pretty harsh, and if the horse were to open the mouth, the way the noseband is rigged, the chain would dig into the mouth if the horse opened her jaw. And then she also has the gag. So if you're using a gag like that, your horse should be able to open its mouth at the very least to escape the obscene amount of pressure and the abrasive mouthpiece should they need to. But the noseband that she uses does not really allow her to do that comfortably. So she's keeping this horse's mouth wrapped around this really harsh bit and not allowing her any escape should the pressure be too much, and then she gets a bloody mouth. So that makes me think that it is a rider error. And this whole issue gets even deeper than that. Her groom was seen running around the showgrounds with a red colored rag to wipe the mouth with, which is odd in the first place because in my experience showing, most people don't go out and buy red rags. It's kind of an odd color to use, so it seems like they chose a color that could best mask the blood. I'm not saying that that's true. Maybe she picked red because her eventing colors are red or something, or her barn colors are red. I don't know. It just seems odd to have that paired with someone who has such a track record of having bloody mouths. And the weirder thing is that there's a video when she's pulling up from cross country, and the horses are obviously really hot and breathing heavily and needing to cool down quickly after cross country, and the groom is running alongside the horse, and the very first thing she's desperately trying to do is wipe the mouth, which is very, very odd. I am not an event rider. I don't have experience with 4-star horses, but as someone who works at the racetrack, our horses come out of their races hot like these event horses do, and the very first things we do are take their tack off, and then they sponge them and do stuff like that, then immediately start walking them so that they can cool down. I've never ever seen someone's first action be to wipe the mouth. So it seems very, very suspicious. And pair that with her track record, it just doesn't seem like it would be a coincidence, in my opinion. So that is also something to be concerned about. The fact that she's that aware, hi Scout, the fact that she's that aware of the fact that she has bloody mouths so often, that she has her groom carry a red rag, and the fact that the first thing that they try to do coming out of cross country is wipe the mouth, that kind of shows a lack of concern for the problem and just a ton of concern for trying to mask the problem instead of actually fix the cause of the problem and avoid a bloody mouth. They're trying to hide it so that she doesn't get in trouble, and I find that really concerning. She did speak out publicly about the bloody mouths and say that her mare had bit her lip and that she was very concerned, and that she sent her to the vet to look at it, like the on-site vet, and that they cleared her for competition, and that she would never ever put her through competition if she was not healthy and prepared for it. But the fact that they were desperately trying to wipe the mouth after cross country, that seems a bit suspicious. And the fact that this has happened 6 to 7 times, if you were really that concerned about why your horse's mouth is bleeding, would you not think that there'd at least be consideration for bit change or something, for something less harsh? That's where I would start personally as a horse person if my horse had a track record of having a bloody mouth. So anyways, I just wanted to talk about this because I do get a lot of people who are anti-bit people and pro-bitless people on my account. I wanted to use this as an example of what not to do with bits. This is someone who's not using bits appropriately, who is using bits that are far too harsh in my opinion, and who has a track record of misusing her equipment. These are the types of people that you guys want to go after and talk to organizations about and express concern about, not people using rubber snaffles and really mild and gentle bits who have proven that their horses are not hurt, who have never had bloody mouths, who have had vets pass their horses and show that they're completely and utterly happy, who use properly fitted equipment, and so on. If you have a happy horse that comes to you in the field every day and you're fitting your equipment well, and they're seeing the vet frequently to check them out and make sure they're healthy, and yada yada yada, you're really not someone that should be put under the microscope in the same way. These professionals are setting an example for the horse world as a whole, and if they get away with stuff like this, that's the example we're setting to kids that are watching them and who idolize them. We're saying this is okay, you can get away with this. Our equine federations don't care, you can get away with this, it's fine, it's ethical, the vets say it's okay, the tack check person passed her, this is okay, this is how you can ride and fit your equipment. And that is really concerning. And with that said, I think that it's important to express your concerns to organizations and to other professionals in your life if you're ever uncertain about what someone's doing. Just because they're a professional doesn't mean that they necessarily know what they're doing or that they're ethical. Professional means that you're simply paid to do what you're doing. And in the horse world, anyone can become a professional. So professionals aren't necessarily ethical. They don't necessarily have the horse's best interests at heart. They're simply making money from their job, and they do it as a career. So don't use, oh, they're a professional, it's fine, as your excuse for why something is or isn't ethical, because professionals aren't necessarily always right. So anyways, the vast majority of event riders are getting away with cross-country and jumping in less harsh bits and without bloody mouths. I think we can say that this is an unusual circumstance, and we can fairly certainly attribute it to the singular person that is having these problems. There's something that's being done that isn't the same as these other riders who aren't having the same problems. So anyways, I hope this kind of let you guys know what's going on and gave you some insight on that. Please don't use this as an anti-bit argument, because anything can be misused. Some people do misuse bits, but some people also misuse bitless options. You can damage cartilage and nasal bones with bitless options being misused. There are also very harsh bitless options that even have spikes underneath the nose bands and stuff like that, and just because those exist doesn't mean everyone who's riding bitless is going to use them or wants to use them in the first place. You can hurt your horse with a brush, you can hurt your horse with a hoof pick, you can hurt your horse with your hands. That doesn't mean we should be telling people not to groom or pet their horses. Just because some people take a piece of equipment or an action or anything to an extreme doesn't mean everyone is going to do that. So we need to take issue with the people who take these things to an extreme instead of taking issue with the equipment itself. Bits, there's so many varieties of bits. Some are ethical, some are not. Bottom line, some people misuse them, some don't. Bottom line, anything can be misused, even your own hands, even your body, lead ropes, halters, etc. So please don't blame the equipment, blame the person. And obviously, like I said, there are some bits that simply should not exist. So in that instance, you can blame the specific bit, but saying all bits across the board are bad, that's just wildly inaccurate. And it's also targeting people who aren't part of the problem that is causing these types of issues. and switching everyone to bitless isn't necessarily going to fix that. Actually, it probably wouldn't at all, because there's still harsh bitless options you can use. And yeah, so I think it's just important to keep that in mind. Anything can be misused, and nothing is more ethical than the other in terms of bits versus bitless. There's so many different options for each one, and they can all cause harm in the wrong hands. And people need to pick what's best for their horse and be aware of the equipment that they're using and how it acts on the surface area of the body that it's acting on. Obviously, super thin bits that are twisted wire, they're more abrasive. The thinner something is, the more localized pressure there is on a smaller area, so the more potential it has to cause damage. And wire adds to this by being abrasive, and it can create cuts in the mouth, and that's why horses tend to back off of wire bits a lot more than they would with a smooth snaffle. So that's something to keep in mind. Learn about the equipment you're using. Don't use something if you don't know how it works. Don't encourage people just to go bitless if you aren't actually aware of how certain bitless options work, because there are very sensitive nerves on the face that can be easily damaged, just as you can damage a horse's mouth if you're stupid with how you use a bit, or if you use a very, very harsh bit. Anyways, so I hope this gave you guys some insight on what's going on, and I'm not saying Marilyn Little is a bad person or that she doesn't love her horses. Maybe she does. There's a lot of people who do crappy things without really realizing it because they simply do not think about it as being abusive. I've seen it lots. There's some people who've just been raised in a way and indoctrinated in a certain way of handling horses that they're just so desensitized to it that they think it's okay. So I really don't know what the problem is here. I don't know what she's thinking. I obviously don't know her, but I did want to bring this up because I do think it's a problem that's reflective of some major issues in the horse world, and the governing bodies allowing people to get away with stuff like that. They're enabling her, and they're enabling other people like her who may do stuff like that deliberately, even if she's not. So it's just cause for concern, and we need to demand more from these organizations.